And just like that, the longest wait in modern royal history is over. We are witnessing the final hours of the reign of King Charles III, and according to multiple reports coming out of Westminster and sources close to the palace, this is not a drill, this is not a rumor whispered in a drawing room, this is a seismic shift that will rewrite the British Constitution before the week is out. You look at the gates of Buckingham Palace right now and everything seems calm. But inside those walls, according to insiders who have spoken strictly under the condition of anonymity, there has been a level of emotional warfare that makes any Netflix drama look like a children's tea party. We aren't talking about a quiet retirement to the gardens of Highgrove. We are talking about a man who waited over 70 years for that crown, looked destiny in the face, and then, by all credible accounts, chose to hand it to his son, not because of the cancer we all know about, but because of a betrayal so sharp it cut through 1,000 years of tradition. And that's the thing, isn't it? The public statement will say health, it will say duty, it will say modernization. But the story unfolding behind the gilded doors, the story that has palace aides reportedly using words like irrevocable and fracture, involves a secret meeting that went so sideways it essentially dissolved the king's most trusted alliance in the span of about 90 seconds. You're going to want to know exactly what was said that made William stand up and take control before he was even crowned. Let's back it up just a step, because context here is everything. To understand why this is so staggering, you have to remember that Charles Philip Arthur George has been the definition of patience. The man was the Prince of Wales when color television was a novelty. He watched empires shrink, he watched the world change, and he endured a personal life that was basically a contact sport for tabloid editors. When Queen Elizabeth II passed in 2022, the entire world pivoted to God Save the King, and for a moment, a brief, glittering moment at the coronation in 2023, it felt like the ship had finally righted itself. But here's the twist that sources say Charles himself didn't fully anticipate. The crown is heavy, sure, but it's the quiet moments after the trumpets fade where the real damage happens. You step into the role and you realize the institution you've inherited is, to be blunt, creaking. The public's patience is thin, the Commonwealth is looking for exits, and then, on top of all that geopolitical chess, you get handed a personal health file that changes your internal clock forever. A cancer diagnosis for a man in his 70s doesn't just change his calendar, it changes the calculation of every single person in the room with him. And it is in that space of vulnerability, that moment where the king is frankly more human than he's ever been allowed to be, that the whole thing goes sideways. Now this is where we pivot to the part of the narrative that is, in my view, the most fascinating and perhaps the most humanly flawed. We are conditioned to think of abdication as a failure, right? It's the thing that happened with Edward VIII, the great scandal of the American divorcee. It's taboo. But what if, and this is just my own read on the situation, not a bias, just an observation, what if the decision to step down when you know the public sentiment is shifting toward William and Catherine is actually the smartest, most selfless political move Charles has ever made? I mean, think of the optics. We just watched Catherine go through her own terrifying health ordeal and come out the other side looking like the literal embodiment of resilience. The crowds aren't just cheering for her, they're clinging to her and William as the stability that the institution desperately needs. Charles sees this, he's not a fool. He knows that every time he looks tired or frail, the camera cuts to William's steady gaze. That's not a conspiracy, that's just television editing. And so he calls the meeting, and this is the moment where, according to the detailed accounts we're hearing from those in the orbit of the palace, the actual stakes were set. Picture the room. It's not the grand throne room. It's one of those stiflingly formal beige and gold private apartments in Buckingham Palace, where the silence is louder than the traffic outside. William and Catherine are there. Queen Camilla is there. And Charles, looking reportedly thinner but with a clarity in his eyes that hasn't been seen in months, says the words, "It's time." He lays it out clean. It's a transition of power, a smooth, planned abdication in favor of King William V. Now, any logical person in that room would understand the gravity and the logic. The line of succession is secure, the new generation is popular, and the king is tired. But logic, as we have seen time and time again in that family, goes out the window the second the phrase queen consort is attached to a pension plan. According to the reports we are analyzing, the silence was broken not by William, but by Camilla. And this is where the narrative shifts from a historical transition to a genuinely Shakespearean betrayal.
She stood up. Now, I want to be very careful here because we are dealing with allegations and private conversations that no camera recorded. But multiple sources claim that her objection was not a gentle, "Are you sure, darling?" It was a pointed public undermining of the heir. She allegedly questioned William's readiness. She raised the specter of timing and public uncertainty. And if she had stopped there, maybe it would have been just an awkward family spat that we'd hear whispers about in 10 years. But she didn't. She crossed the line that, frankly, I don't think anyone in the room expected her to cross. She reached back into the darkest corners of Charles's childhood, and we're talking about the Gordonston years, the bullying, the profound loneliness of being the heir with a mother who was, by necessity, a queen first. These were the secrets of the pillow, the things a husband tells a wife in the dark when the weight of the crown is crushing his chest. And in that moment, she weaponized them. She didn't just say William isn't ready. She essentially said, you didn't survive your past just to hand this over now. You're being weak. And I have to interject with a bit of human sarcasm here, because honestly, if you're going to torpedo your own position in the royal family, using a 70-something-year-old man's boarding school trauma as your leverage is gotta be the definition of a tactical own goal. It's like setting fire to the castle while you're still standing in the royal bedroom. The reaction in the room, by all accounts, was instantaneous and visceral. William didn't shout, he didn't storm out, he did something far more powerful. He rose and he simply ended the meeting. We're done here. That's it. No Your Majesty, no deference to the argument, he just closed the book on the conversation. And that is the pivot point of this entire saga. Because in that second, the crown didn't just skip a generation on paper, it transferred authority right there in the living room. Charles looked at his son, looked at his wife, and realized the alliance he thought he had built over 2 decades was fundamentally transactional. Camilla had overplayed her hand because she forgot the first rule of being a Windsor. You don't get to be the main character. You are a supporting actor in a very long-running, very expensive production. The minute she made it about her status, about her loss of power, she validated every single reason why Charles needed to step down in the first place. That night, the story goes, was the real turning point. It wasn't a grand ceremony with robes and bishops. It was 2 men in a private study, Charles and William. And this is the part where, as a commentator, I have to say there's something genuinely moving about the image of this. For decades, the narrative has been about Charles's complicated relationship with his own father, Prince Philip, the tough love, the gruffness. And here you have Charles, stripped of the formal armor, essentially saying to his son, I gave her my trust, and she used my pain as a chess piece. And William's response, according to the accounts we've gathered, was not just filial sympathy, it was a strategic pivot. He started planning. He started outlining the security of the transition. He became king in that conversation, not because a bishop poured oil on his head, but because he took the emotional and logistical burden off his father's shoulders. That is the kind of stuff that doesn't make the front page of the morning papers, but it changes the entire structure of the family. And then we get to the second meeting. This one was different. This wasn't a debate, it was a coroner's inquest into Camilla's political future. The seating arrangement had changed. William and Catherine were closer to the king. Camilla was isolated, flanked by a silence that must have been absolutely deafening. When Charles spoke again, the word abdication was a done deal. There was no objection. There couldn't be, because in the span of less than 24 hours, the queen consort had discovered a brutal truth about the monarchy. The firm protects the crown, not the spouse. And once you are perceived as a threat to the smooth transition of that crown, the walls close in really, really quickly. The final piece of this puzzle is the speech. We're all waiting for it, the address to the nation. And I can tell you right now, if the drafts we're hearing are accurate, this won't be a weepy farewell. This will be a masterclass in controlled, dignified defiance. He will talk about service and legacy. He will heap praise on Catherine's grace and William's strength, and he will not mention Camilla, not a single word. That omission, in the language of the royals, is louder than a scream. It is the ultimate erasure. So, where does that leave us? It leaves us watching the dawn of King William V and Queen Catherine. And look, I have to offer a bit of personal perspective here because it's hard not to. I'm not a royalist by any stretch of the imagination, but there's something undeniably compelling about watching a father realize that his greatest contribution to the 1,000-year-old institution might actually be getting out of the way. That's not failure. That's a kind of brutal, pragmatic wisdom that we rarely see in positions of absolute power. Charles's legacy will now forever be defined by this one act of stepping aside, and the tragedy for him is that it was catalyzed by a betrayal from the one person who was supposed to have his back. But the benefit goes to the institution. William and Catherine step into a role that is infinitely more challenging than the one they've been training for. They had the public goodwill, sure, but they also have a world that is now watching with a much sharper, less forgiving eye. The monarchy just pulled off its biggest plot twist in 90 years, and somehow it's left the family both stronger and permanently, irrevocably shattered behind closed doors. The gilded cage has a new set of key holders, and the old ones are being quietly shown to the door of history.